Welcome to episode 101 or 100, part 2. This time I chat with Tom Halls from British Tennis on filling the stands and filling the courts in England.
Welcome to the Sports Geek Podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals.
And now, here's your host who wonders what Wilt Chamberlain would have thought of Tinder, Sean Callanan.
Thank you very much, DJ Joel. You are listening to the Sports Geek Podcast, available on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and my favourite podcasting app, Pocket Casts. My name is Sean Callanan. You can reach me via email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com, via Twitter, @Sean Callanan, and @SportsGeek. You can find me on most platforms under those monikers. Thank you very much for listening. This is episode 101. Or if you were listening to episode 100, this is part 2 of episode 100. Going with a double episode. And again, a big thank you for everyone who's listened to any of the previous 100 episodes. Very, very humbled by the amount of support that I'm getting from people who are working in the sports business community, who are attempting to get into the sports business community. That's who I'm building this podcast for people who are working at the coalface, working on digital initiatives, working on technology in the sports business, working on marketing initiatives in the sports business. And they're the people that I talk to every week on the podcast. This week I catch up with a good friend of mine, Tom Halls from British Tennis, to talk about what his role is at British Tennis and looking at the ability to attract participants into the world of tennis, but then also activate events and also things like the Davis Cup, where Great Britain will take on teams like Australia in tennis events. So we'll talk to Tom about that and also some of his insights from SEAT 2015. So here is my conversation with Tom Halls from British Tennis. Very happy to welcome a good mate of mine all the way from London, Tom Halls, Head of Digital from Lawn Tennis Association in London. Welcome to the Sports Geek Podcast.
Hi, Sean. Good to be here finally.
Yep, exactly. Finally, we did schedule this after SEAT London, and unfortunately, I think it was head colds and babies got in the way for us to record one earlier. How are things in London at the minute?
They're good. We're looking forward to our Davis Cup tie against the Aussies in a couple of weeks. We've had our summer season, and winter is well and truly here now.
Well, first of all, I guess explain to everyone who doesn't know, what does the Lawn Tennis Association or British Tennis, what does it entail?
Sure. So we're the national governing body for tennis in Great Britain. So we look after all of the sanctioned tournaments, everything from lower series stuff where you and your kids might be playing, right up to the elite level stuff where you've got people like Andy Murray, Nick Kyrgios playing in that. And we govern all the tournaments, but our main role is to get more people playing tennis more often. It's that whole kind of grassroots side of the sport.
So the only thing that's not under your under the LTA is Wimbledon. Wimbledon is run as its own entity as a Grand Slam. It's a little bit different to Tennis Australia that runs the Australian Open and the grassroots and participation piece that you do.
We're the only Grand Slam nation that do not run our own Grand Slam. So the Aussies, Tennis Australia run the Aussie Slam. USTA run the US Slam that started yesterday, and the French Federation also run their Slam. So we are completely unique in that regard. We work very closely with Wimbledon, and my counterpart there, Alex Willis, is brilliant. She goes around all of the Grand Slams and does a superb job for Wimbledon. But they're not directly tied to us in terms of performance metrics or anything like that. But we work very, very closely, obviously, we're literally 5 minutes down the road from the All England Club as well.
So it makes it for a very different proposition than the other, Grand Slam tennis federations, because you don't have that major tournament. And really, we talk a lot about fan engagement and things like that when we're talking about, digisport, as it's known over in the UK. Mm-hmm. But for you, it's really it's more players and getting people to participate more so than cheeks on the seats and the fans attending matches, because yours is really that grassroots participation.
Yeah, so there are kind of two key metrics in that sense. There is the participation numbers, feet on court, how many people are playing tennis on a weekly basis across the country. But we do have targets around our major events as well. So we've got 5 tournaments in the lead up to Wimbledon. It's like the US Open series, apart from they're not owned by, it's not the Wimbledon series. So those tournaments lead up to Wimbledon. So a lot of the players here, so you'll get all of the US guys, Dimitrov, Federer, Nadal, Murray, Kyrgios, all of these guys will probably come and practice here at some point in the couple of weeks leading up to Wimbledon. So there are some great opportunities there for engagement and getting some good content there. But yeah, you're entirely right. Our pure, the pure metric, as it were, it's what we do is getting more people on court.
And so one of the things that you oversaw and looked over was the new LTA website earlier in this year. What were some of the things you were looking for in going through that refresh, and what you were trying to do as far as engage players and getting more people to play, but then also making it a bit of a portal for all those events that you're also hosting?
Sure, it's a great question, and I think one of the key challenges for a lot of governing bodies, I think what Tennis Australia do superbly, is break down that kind of myth of a governing body being very statistical. And it's traditionally a lot of NGB or National Governing Body websites have been very encyclopedic. It's been full of self-serving content and information. So a big part of it for us was to flip it around and say, well, what do our fans want? What do the players want? What do coaches, the workforce, parents of children playing, what do they want? So it was completely refreshed on that basis. And we looked quite, we've had no qualms about that. We've looked very heavily at Tennis Australia because we see them as class leading with what they've done in terms of design for tennis. And the idea has been to kind of break down that perception of tennis in this country. Tennis in this country is still often incorrectly labelled as kind of an elitist sport, but it's actually very open, very freely available to play. There's tons of courts. It's pretty cheap to get started, actually, if you get a racket and balls and so on. So the website was kind of an entry portal for people trying to get into the sport in this country, or people that wanted to be a little bit inspired, but also those that are already competing and playing. How can we enable them to increase their amount of participation or increase the amount of time they're playing? For us, when I say enabler, that for me is a key kind of pillar for what we do with digital in this organisation. We can't, when we talk gamification and so on, we're talking real life gamification here. It's quite difficult to shift the dial and get people out onto court. Influencing behaviour is quite tricky. So we see the LTA's channels, whether it's the web, whether it's social media, whether it's email, as being able to enable people to do that and remove some of those barriers. So if people can't find a court, we have a court finder tool. If they can't book a court or their time is quite precious, then we've got a court booking functionality as well now. So we're slowly turning that tanker around and kind of saying, well, tennis isn't as difficult to get into as you think, and the website's been a key part of that. It desperately needed an overhaul. So we've been live since about February now, and we've in a constant kind of, to quote the software guys, we're kind of in an agile process in that sense of it reiterating and iterating again on a month-to-month basis.
I think what I like about the new site is I have to answer the question because we're on the podcast, but it answers a lot of the questions that I had of you for the LTA, because you go to the site and, the fact it's responsive is what you need. The top tile is find your closest court, and your second tile is, the Davis Cup, we've got a semi-final await, and then catch up with all the news. Like, you can see straight away, what you're trying to do with your audience, to say, well, if you're looking for a game, just simply type in your postcode and we'll get you on your way.
Yeah, and so for instance, the find your closest court, or the play section in the navigation was an entirely new section of the website when we launched that. We'd never, believe it or not, even explained the basic rules of tennis, the difference between a forehand, a backhand, etc., the various ways you can play. So that play section and all of the content in that was completely rewritten, as was the entire site, actually rewritten from the ground up with the consumer and the fan in mind. But what we do have as well is a big chunk of what we're doing at the moment is to bring all of that key functionality. So kind of 80% of our traffic are existing tennis players. And the functionality there, obviously, you want to be very careful when you tweak that and move it. So that functionality, finding a competition, finding a course for coaches is not yet in a responsive format. So that's kind of our phase 2, our second sprint, as it were, is to bring that over. I mean, we're about 50-50 split in between mobile, tablet and desktop. But I'd expect it to move kind of probably towards the high 60s, low 70s towards mobile and tablet when we move that last bit of functionality now. So it has been, it's been a great project to work on, and it's not been without its challenges. Even speaking to my friends at TA, they've had similar challenges and so on. So there's a lot of best practice sharing. And I think for me, that's also where the sports digital world is brilliant. People are very open about their challenges, and we've been able to pick their brains quite a lot.
And so the other part of the role at tennis is taking advantage of the events and that you've got the opportunity in Davis Cup. And for those who are in the US, they should know Davis Cup. It's got a long history. Obviously, we've got a long history here in Australia. It's it's the team event for tennis where countries go up against one another. They're your tentpole marketing events for British tennis.
Yeah, they are. So, I mean, we've been really fortunate not fortunate with Davis Cup this year. The team have gone pretty deep in the draw. The semi-final against Australia, I believe, is winnable. And then you're looking at a pretty tough final, either Belgium or Argentina. But that's the first time in a couple of decades we've got this far in that. So that's done really well to extend the summer season, as it were. Tennis is quite seasonal here. We don't have the all-round weather that certainly you guys down under get, and also to an extent the guys in the States. So we have to work quite hard to extend that and keep people thinking about tennis. The US Open at the moment does a great job of that, but Davis Cup has been a key part. And the tournaments in the lead up to Wimbledon, the Aegon Championships, the Aegon International, the Aegon Open, all of these tournaments that we have do a good job of making people aware of tennis in this country. But there are, unsurprisingly, quite unique demographics to each of those events. So they certainly raise awareness. They're on... most of them are on free-to-view TV channels, which is great for us. People can really watch a ton of tennis around summer. And Davis Cup will be free to view as well. So, that will be a big piece. And obviously, because it has Andy Murray and the guys in it, it draws a lot of focus.
So how do you do that balance? Because I think it's very similar to the football teams that have friendlies and ties every now and again in between World Cups. And you've got channels like Twitter that's always about joining the conversation. How do you manage that balance of what British tennis is tweeting and posting about all the time, and then going into Davis Cup mode, because you're really serving two fan bases at that point, where it's your super avid face paint cheering at the tennis type of fan to your casual tennis observer, or just someone who has a social hit. How do you have that balance and build up that hype without annoying both of those two very diverse fan bases?
I mean, I think we do a great job in terms of not going too far with a lot of our social stuff. I mean, we recognise that our demographic on Facebook is very, very different to Twitter, to Instagram, and so on. So there's quite a refined content strategy behind each of those channels. We've got a good understanding that our demographic on Facebook are traditionally female, 35 kind of plus. So there's that, that a lot of them are big Andy Murray fans. So the content is tailored and the frequency is tailored a little bit more that way. We have a number of products as well, much the same as tennis. Australia have Fast 4 and cardio tennis. We have Tennis Tuesdays and some very demographic driven products. So it's about personalizing that content wherever possible. We've done a big piece with Facebook with their advertising and looking at visitor groups and demographics to ensure that we're hitting the right people. And that's worked really, really well for us, in terms of ROI. But for us, it's very much around personalizing that content. And then we do ramp it up quite significantly. I mean, probably last year, during an Andy Murray match, we were almost live tweeting the points. And then we kind of looked at it and said, well, if you've got someone like a BBC or an ESPN or a Eurosport, those guys are always going to be front of people's minds with live scoring. So where can we differentiate? Where can we be a bit different? And that was kind of our approach since last summer moving forward. So we've looked at the unique content we can get here, whether it's tutorial videos with Andy Murray, whether it's unique interviews, whether it's trying to pick up on popular culture here as well. I think we've done really well to move away from the kind of stuffy perception, governing bodies in this country can get at times. We'd like to be a little bit more creative, but it's a slow process, but we're getting there.
And do you think, a hashtag like Back the Brits is something that's just been it's something that tennis now owns, that you can now roll out every time, whether Andy Murray's playing in a Grand Slam or in Davis Cup, that's sort of your rallying cry to get British tennis fans on board?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I mean, you look at the International Tennis Federation, the global governing body for tennis, the ITF have even picked it up. So when Davis Cup ties take place, the ITF do a hashtag vote off. So it'll be Back the Brits versus the Aussie one slips my mind at the moment. I'm not quite sure what hashtag they used there.
It might be please stop Nick Kyrgios, please stop. Giving his current track record recently.
I've had some fascinating conversations with colleagues at TA about Nick. I won't go into the stories now, but there are some good ones. But Back the Brits has really transcended our major events for us, and it's now kind of it's a brilliant tool and campaign for us to use year round, because our players play year round, the high performance ones. So Andy Murray will play sort of 25, 30 tournaments a year. Laura Robson, Heather Watson, Johanna Konta, the girls that are up and coming and doing really, really well at the moment. It allows people to get behind them. The challenges of governing bodies, we don't have a team per se. So by uniting people behind, it's not dissimilar to We the North, I think. You're trying to unite people behind a community, a tennis community, behind the players and so on. And Davis Cup atmosphere is completely different to Wimbledon. And that's what I love about Davis Cup. It's very, very rowdy. You've got the David Putties kind of of the world there.
It's very tribal. It's something that's not usual for tennis.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's not been unheard of to hear sledging in the stands between fans as well at Davis Cup, which again you wouldn't traditionally associate tennis with. So it's a phenomenal atmosphere, and I think it'll be a brilliant one in September, especially with the Aussies as well, because there's a very, very strong Australian contingent over here, certainly within London as well. So I've no doubt the Aussies will sell out their allocation as well, and it'll be a really rowdy tie.
It will be very interesting to see how they go. Australia's been in a bit of the wilderness with the Davis Cup recently, but got a bit of talent there. It's just a matter of harnessing talent like Nick Kyrgios and seeing if he can perform on the court as well as he does with the sledging off the court in the recent times.
Indeed.
One thing I wanted to ask is sort of go into your background and doing a bit of research on this and see that you sort of how did you get into the world of sport? Because you have you've got some pretty good names in your Rolodex of previous roles there.
It's been a bit of I think, I've always been passionate about sport since I was a kid. I wanted to be a lawyer, and then kind of actually went into the toy industry. So it was about as diverse as it could be. And then ended up at Electronic Arts, the video games company, and worked on a lot of sports franchises there, whether it was FIFA, Madden, it was Tiger Woods golf at the time then, actually Grand Slam tennis as well. So I'd always worked on or wanted to retain an interest in sport, and kind of went from Electronic Arts to Coca-Cola to I worked on packaging, digital packaging as well for Electronic Arts, and moved to packaging for Coca-Cola during the Olympics. So looked after their Olympic packaging campaigns with the print agency there. So, and then realized, well, actually, I want to do this sports thing full time. So had got a wealth of content experience alongside managing projects at Coca-Cola. There was a strong element of managing all of their global content pieces. So moved over to Head, who are very well known in the States, probably more so for their tennis stuff, but in Europe it's very big on skiing and snowboarding. They're a big multi-sports brand in that sense. Lots of tradition. And it was kind of working for them across all of their, I think, 9 different divisions with a ton of world-class athletes. You're talking people like Andy Murray, Novak Djokovic, across a plethora of sports. So, and that really gave me a passion. And I think that the reason behind the move from head to the LTA was to actually make a difference in sports. I think it's one thing selling a product, whether that is a tennis racket or a ski or that piece, but actually the goal of getting more people on court is one of the biggest drivers for me here, because it's fundamentally you're a good guy in that sense. So I think that's been really appealing, and actually, the opportunity has been brilliant for the SEAT conferences and trying to gain some insight from the rest of the sports industry, because I think governing bodies are quite unique in that sense.
Well, that's the thing. I was going to talk to you about some of your takeaways from SEAT, and one was one of the big ones which you listed in your blog post at tomhalls.com. Very good, grabbing your own domain name. Embedding digital is still a challenge for many organisations. Completely agree. It was a big theme at SEAT.
Yeah, and I think we had some brilliant discussions. Some of the panels I was on, and the kind of open session that you hosted with us. And I think we had, was it Melissa from the New York Jets? We had Kevin Kinghorn from the Canucks.
Kevin from the Canucks. It was just one of the open let's talk about everything type. Discussions, which they don't get set on the agenda, but that we sort of let the discussion fall where it was. And it was really around, I guess, the integration of digital across the organisation and having the organisation better understand, what digital can offer.
Yeah, and we've probably seen that even more so than some organisations in terms of our digital structure here is quite unique. We actually have the web team, we have a CRM team, and we have our customer services team all sit underneath me. So there's a team of about 15 or 16 there. And customer services sitting within digital is relatively unique, is my understanding. But the concept is very much, we're almost an engagement team in that sense, because we can track all the data and the customer touch points and then impact on that with our channels. So we'll make changes to the website, to our email communications, to social posts based on what we're hearing directly from customers. So we've done a good job embedding digital there. But actually, so digital sits within marketing and communications here, but there were some great discussions at SEAT around, do you put a digitally enabled person in every team around the organisation? Do you have a separate digital function? Is digital even a thing anymore in terms of, what Shane Harmon at Westpac was saying, we're developing digital strategies. Well, we're not developing digital strategies. We're developing strategies for a digital world. And I think that point really sort of hit home with me, because I think actually the changing demographic and consumers we're seeing within sports these days expect that kind of level of integration with digital now. They see what the big retailers are doing, the Best Buys, the Walmarts, and they expect that within sports. I think, the fascinating thing looking at the San Francisco 49ers stadium when we went on the tour at SEAT, brilliant tour, was how deeply they'd integrated digital into the customer experience. And I think when an organization recognizes that digital is often the first touch point for a lot of people, then that's kind of where, you get the buy-in and it heads forward. I mean, our CEO is very progressive. Michael Downey came over from Tennis Canada and previously headed up marketing for Maple Leaf Entertainment, so knows the sports industry. And he's been a big advocate of what we do within digital. So I think actually it's we've been really lucky in that sense. But there's still a lot more organisations can do, I think. And hopefully going back to SEAT next year, which I'll be looking to do, I'm hoping that we've all made a bit more progress in that sense.
Definitely. And the thing is, it's not that just digital is the first touch point. It's a constant ongoing touch point. It's
throughout.
It's not. Yeah, first is an easy one to sort of target, but it is. Yes, that's how they've reached or found out about you. Then they go to the game, and then they're looking at their device, and then they're reading articles afterwards, or they're opening up an EDM. So it's that multiple touch point that digital needs to be integrated across the whole facet.
Couldn't agree more. And one of the key things we're doing over the course of the next month or two is mapping out common customer journeys that touch digital or touch, our customer service team. I think, and I'll give Natalie Brown a big shout out here, because listening to her on the podcast last week, I think what those guys are doing in Melbourne, with the membership program and thinking about all of those potential touch points, that's where we'd like to be. Because I think when we truly understand that customer journey end to end for us, so what inspires you to get on a tennis court, what are all the touch points along that journey, that's when we can start influencing people and actually making changes to their behaviour.
Yeah, exactly. The stuff that they're doing with the Lightning Rewards program that is, and the end game for them as far as mapping out what the customer is doing, the amount of data that they'll be able to get. Then it's about ascertaining what the data tells them and trying to, like you just said, influence them to either buy a ticket or play tennis. One thing I did want to touch on, you did tell me before we started, you are looking for a new challenge and taking on a new challenge.
I am. I've looked and I found, or rather, I was hoodwinked away, or as we might say over here. So I'll be joining Formula E, the new electric racing car championships global. So it's a bit of a challenge, a bit of a change from thinking about GB and Great Britain and thinking globally. So I think what there will be is there'll be a fantastic opportunity for hopefully someone listening to the podcast. To look at that role as I step out.
Yeah, so once this does get published, as I said to Tom before we got started, I've done a few interviews post-seat, so this will get published very soon, and hopefully I will get the links for someone to come in and potentially fill your very very big shoes, because they will be big shoes to fill there at the LTA. Tom, before I finish up, where can people find you on the internet, and what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The Twitter, probably. I'm TG Halls on there, G for Graham. Generally tends to be sports biz stuff. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got my own website in terms of tomhalls.com. It's not probably as regularly as updated as it should be. And
I see from your Vine account, you're already starting to use your children to produce viral content.
Yeah, so it's a great clip. Actually, if people haven't seen it, I am on Vine as well. I think it's probably TG Halls as well. I'm not as sports biz related, but the idea is we'll get them into sports. And actually, but on that basis, that piece has been picked up. I don't know if you have the show there in Australia. I've got a show here in the UK called You've Been Framed, which is basically funny home videos. Yes. And that's actually going to be picked up and played on the show now as a result of them seeing it on social media.
Oh, terrific
the
work.
Power of social media.
As someone who has gone viral myself, I look forward to seeing his career grow over time. But I'll put a link to that Vine and give it a few more loops in the show notes. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm looking forward to catching up with you again at Seat London next year once we lock in the date and everything is sorted for April next year. And I'll speak to you then.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Cheers, mate.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now.
Thanks again to Tom Halls, or at TG Halls on Twitter. Please send him a tweet. One, if you're listening, tell him that you are listening to the Sports Geek podcast. Additionally, send him a tweet if you want his job. As he said there, he is leaving the LTA and moving on to the world of motorsport. So obviously there will be a position to be filled in the Lawn Tennis Association. Question for the podcast, and it's really one similar to what Tom is going through, going into a new job. And sometimes I see anyway, I'm a big proponent of LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn as a way to network. If you have not connected with me on LinkedIn, please send me an invite. And especially if you do send me an invite, tell me that you listen to the podcast, because I'm very open as far as networking with people who work in the sports business, but I'd really like to connect and understand and know know who is actually listening to the podcast. And my question from this podcast is, are you networking for your next job, even though you have one now and you're not on the lookout? What I've found in my long history using LinkedIn is that a lot of people will only start using LinkedIn when they're looking for a job or when they're forced to look for a job, i.e. they've lost their job. And that's actually the worst time, and it also comes across really desperate. The classic LinkedIn update, looking for next opportunity, which says I'm out of work, which is obviously true. But from my point of view, you should be networking like crazy and of a consistent standard on LinkedIn all the time. So if your employer came along and said, why are you connecting on LinkedIn? There should not be any spike in activity because you are now looking for a job. It should be, he's always doing that or she's always doing that because they're looking to build out their professional network. So that's my advice. And I would like to know, what are you doing on that space? Even if it is a passive accepting connections, connecting with people you're meeting at conferences, connecting with people that are like-minded. What is your strategy? For mine, the story that I tell of my, LinkedIn origin story, coming from an IT world, coming from the world of programming and coders. Obviously, we were early on LinkedIn, and I was running a applications development department in a big energy company that was undergoing some change. There was going to be a large takeover of the whole department, and effectively everyone was going to lose their jobs. And so there was 300 people in this department. I was managing a team of about 45 to 50 people, and it was the worst place to be working at the time. Not knowing when your end date is, not knowing if you had a job 1 month, 2 months, 6 months down the track. And I really used LinkedIn as a way to rally the troops and really try to generate a little bit of positivity in the department. And so pretty much said, look, everybody, let's all connect. Let's all get on LinkedIn. Let's update our LinkedIn profile. Let's make it look professional. It's your online resume, after all. And it really shows, who you are and what you know, in my opinion. And so in that case, and this was, we're talking 8-9 years ago now, we all connected. So all of my team connected on LinkedIn, the whole department, 300 of us ended up all being connected on LinkedIn. And as time passed and as people moved on to new jobs, my pitch to everyone was, in 3 years' time when we're all in new positions, we'll all be connected and it'll be this little micro influencer network that you can lean on. And even to this day, 9 years on or whatever it is, I'm still getting some people pinging back to me around about jobs and where people are going and where there's potential opportunities. And I'm still referring people in that network. So to me, that's the biggest opportunity that LinkedIn offers from a professional development point of view. So if you're not, I'm maybe getting in a bit of preachy mode here, if you're not connecting with people that you're interacting with, both meeting in real life, maybe potentially meeting and connecting with via other platforms like Twitter and those kind of things. As you get to know them, then connect on LinkedIn. And then because you never know down the track how many, where those opportunities might lie. For me, LinkedIn's also very powerful with this podcast. When I'm looking at the share stats of the podcast, because the podcast is built for sports and business and marketing professionals, it gets shared a lot on LinkedIn. Okay, and if you could share this podcast on LinkedIn, I would very much appreciate it. I can see by the numbers that it is getting shared on LinkedIn, because my description of LinkedIn is it's Facebook for suits. It's where people connect from a professional point of view, whereas Facebook is more personal. Although I am seeing that those lines blur, I'm seeing more professional connections happening in Facebook as privacy and things like that loosen up. But at the moment, if you want a professional relationship with someone, you connect with them on LinkedIn. You don't friend them on Facebook. So it really gives you an opportunity to make those connections, and you never know where those connections might lead. You never know where you might find or hear about that next job. You never know what that next opportunity might be. So I'm always constantly surprised, and humbled on how much of my content gets shared on LinkedIn, but also how much of my content that I share. So if you don't get the Sports Geek newsletter, and thank you for those who do, and the people who say how well it is curated, I owe that to everyone who's listening, and everyone who follows me on all the different social channels. Everything that I share on Twitter and LinkedIn, the clicks get aggregated and it gets put into that newsletter. But I do get a lot of people, and I'm really surprised how many people come out and say it when they meet me, that they read a lot of the articles that I share on LinkedIn. So a lot of people are using LinkedIn as a news source as well, for professional development, relevant business articles, those kind of things. You're not going to get animated cat pictures and quirky YouTube clips on LinkedIn. You will get stuff that's more business oriented. So there, my question that's the longest question of the podcast ever. But my question today is: are you networking for your next job? Even though you might have one now, let us know in the comments. This will be the show notes for this episode will be sportsgeekhq.com/101 for episode 101. So yeah, that's it for this episode. The sounds of the game that you hear at the end of the episode are a shout out to Aussie sensation, if you keep reading all the media reports and everything from a Facebook point of view, Jared Hayne, who made his debut for the 49ers last week. And over here in Australia, the media has been going absolutely bananas over everything Jared Hayne. I know Scott Kegley, who was with the 49ers and has recently taken on a role with the Minnesota Vikings, talking to him before he changed roles. He was talking about how the spikes in traffic and the fact that there was a lot of Facebook activity around Jared Hayne. So I'm going to have a shout out to Jared Hayne here. And the sounds of the game aren't from Levi Stadium, but it was from a game that I attended at the old stadium, Candlestick Park, back in 2012. So that's the sounds of the game this week. It is at a 49ers game, not at Levi Stadium. So please, as the seasons are kicking off, NFL and the like, and anything in Premier League, please pull out your phone, record some audio, and send it to me. I would love to include the sounds of the game from your game on the podcast. Simply send it to Sean@sportsgeekhq.com, and we'll include it in the podcast. James won't have a problem putting it at the end of the podcast. That's it. This has been a double episode of episode 100. This is episode 101. Thank you again to Tom Halls for being my guest on this show. Thank you very much for listening. If you've liked this episode and appreciated the content and the interview from my guest, if you would please leave a review on iTunes, that would be very much appreciated. You can simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. That will take you to the iTunes page, or just type in Sports Geek Podcast in iTunes and it will take you to the page to leave a review. And please let me know that you have. I have got tracking and everything on it, so it will tell me. But tell me that it is you. As I've said before, some people's iTunes names are quite obtuse and I can't figure out who it was. Until next episode, thank you very much. My name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and you've been listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.
Like the Sports Geek Podcast? Find us on Facebook.com/SportsGeek. Check out which teams work with Sports Geek at SportsGeekHQ.com/clients. Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to SportsGeekHQ.com/iTunes.